On April the 6th of 2023, teenager Bryce Brooks and several companions were on the beach off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Although yellow flags had been raised to warn against moderate currents, there were no lifeguards around at the time. At some point during the day, Brooks noticed a group of children struggling to escape the riptide and dove in the water to rescue them. The teenager swam into the strong current and pulled the 4 children out to safety, but was swept underwater before he could escape himself. A family friend of Brooks's father of 3, Charles "Chuck" Johnson, saw the teenager unable to come back to the surface and rushed to save him, but was also taken by the current. A search operation later retrieved their bodies. Brooks and Johnson were airlifted to a hospital where they were pronounced dead. Brooks was hailed as a hero by his family, who proudly stated of the late teen, he literally saved the lives of 4 kids at the expense of his own. Remembering Johnson, Brooks's father told the media that he was a person that looks after everyone, and described him giving up his life in an attempt to save that of his son as everything I expect and I know about that man. Number 21, Devonte Tava. Roughly 24 hours after Idahosa had been gunned down on Ocean Drive, another young man was killed in the same area. In a similarly brutal manner, 19-year-old Devonte Tava was walking on the sidewalk with his arm around a woman when a man headed in their direction pulled a gun from under his shirt and shot him from point-blank range. The attacker fired nearly a dozen shots and disappeared into the crowd as chaos unfolded and people started running for their lives. The police managed to catch up with the shooter, 24-year-old Dontavius Polk. In the immediate aftermath, body cam footage showed him being tackled to the ground by a pursuing officer. The gun he'd used to kill Tava was found in the area of the shooting. Polk was arrested on a charge of first-degree murder and was held in custody as his case was pending, while his motives remained unclear. The police did describe his actions as a targeted hit. Following the 2 fatal shootings, the Miami Beach City Commission announced new rules meant to facilitate curfews and beach closures during spring break. Commissioner David Suarez told the media in February of 2024, "We are not taking half measures. We really are doing everything we can to end spring break." Commissioner Alex Fernandez echoed that sentiment, stating, "We are shutting the door on spring break once and for all. Lawlessness will not be tolerated in Miami Beach." Aside from the killing of Idahosa and Tava, both of whom were visiting from out of town, spring break 2023 in Miami Beach had resulted in nearly 500 arrests, the seizure of more than 100 firearms, and numerous police clashes and brawls. Number 20, Dylan Bazelle and Drew Fear. Illinois high schoolers Dylan Bazelle and Drew Fear were vacationing at the Copper Mountain Ski Resort in Colorado on March the 19th of 2023. At around 8:35 p.m., roughly an hour after the resort had closed off its ski area, the 2 teenagers broke into a snowboarding area and sledded down a half pipe, which was roped off at the time. As they reached the end of the pipe, they were launched into the air off a large snowbank and fell on the hard ice below. A witness immediately called 911. First responders arrived quickly at the scene and began performing resuscitating procedures on the 2 unconscious teenagers. Their efforts unfortunately proved fruitless, and the duo was pronounced dead. According to records from the Summit County Coroner's Office, Bazelle and Fear died of multiple blunt force trauma injuries sustained as a result of their fall on the ice. Number 19, Dominic Glass. On March the 17th of 2021, police officers from the popular spring break destination of Clearwater, Florida, arrested 18-year-old Dominic Glass on the beach on a charge of disorderly conduct. The crowd jeered at the police vehicle as it made its way on the sand, and in the moments that followed, another reveler pulled open the rear door, allowing Glass to escape. The 18-year-old jolted out and started running away while still in handcuffs, and as the crowd cheered him on, the cops then got out and chased after Glass. eventually managing to form a blockade to trap him. As the team was attempting to go around it, an officer pointed a gun at him, prompting him to surrender. He was grabbed by his handcuffs and dragged back to the police car. The individual suspected of opening the door for Glass was also taken into custody. Glass received 2 additional charges of escaping arrest and resisting an officer without violence. Footage of him running from the cops was published on social media and went viral. Number 18. Nara Cruz. 21-year-old Nara Cruz and 5 of her friends checked into a beachfront hotel in South Padre Island, Texas, where they were going to celebrate spring break together. In 2015, on March the 18th at around 8 a.m., Cruz went to admire the view from the balcony of her hotel room situated on the building's 7th floor. Moments later, the young woman plummeted from the balcony. Cruz suffered fatal head injuries in the fall and her body was recovered by first responders. Other hotel guests described a heartbreaking scene as Cruz's family was crying in the lobby upon learning of her death. While investigating the incident, the authorities determined that the young woman had lost her balance and slipped while she was trying to adjust her position on the balcony's ledge. Cruz had turned of legal drinking age on March the 6th, but police didn't suspect alcohol had been a factor in her death, which was ruled to have been accidental. Number 17. Christine Englehart. In March of 2021, spring breaker Christine Englehart had left her home in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and traveled alone to Miami, Florida. While visiting South Beach, Englehart met 2 men in their early 20s, identified as Ivory Collier and Dorian Taylor, both from Greensboro, North Carolina. At around 1 a.m. on March the 18th, the trio went back to Englehart's room at the Albion Hotel. Surveillance footage showed the 2 men leaving the hotel only 30 minutes after they'd been recorded following Englehart inside. Hours later, the young woman was found dead. The autopsy revealed she'd suffered a fentanyl overdose and that she'd been abused before she was left to die in her hotel room. Collier and Taylor were arrested in the aftermath and accused of not only drugging and assaulting the victim, but also of stealing her credit cards and cash to use them during their trip. According to an arrest report, Collier admitted to giving Englehart a green pill and that he and Taylor had forced themselves on her as she lay unconscious. After the toxicology report was released, the 2 men were charged with first-degree murder. A second first-degree murder charge was also added against Taylor for supplying fentanyl to a 21-year-old man who was found dead on March the 20th, 2 days after Englehart. Prosecutors reported that they would seek the death penalty for both men. Number 16. Jordan Idahosa. 21-year-old Jordan Idahosa was walking with a group of friends on Ocean Drive in Miami Beach, Florida, on the night of March the 17th of 2023. Idahosa, who was originally from Georgia, was spending spring break in the area, which was a common choice for the holiday period due to festivities held annually. As captured on surveillance cameras, Idahosa was abruptly ambushed during the nighttime stroll and gunned down. Officers who were patrolling nearby arrived at the scene within seconds and found Idahosa's body lying in the street along with that of another victim, 21-year-old Georgia man Tameen Abdullah. Both were taken to the hospital where Idahosa died while Abdullah remained in critical condition but ultimately recovered. The Miami Beach Police Department released a statement saying the shooting was an isolated incident. At the scene, officers had arrested LaWarren O'Meal Meadows, who'd approached them and admitted to the deadly shooting. Meadows reported that someone had pulled a gun on him, prompting him to open fire. He wasn't charged as of the latest information available on the matter, due to the fact that local authorities considered his self-defense claim under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Number 15. Carter Howell and Henry Meacock. 20-year-old Carter Howell, a student at the Georgia University, was spending spring break in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico on March the 6th of 2023. While in his third-floor room at the Melia Hotel, Howell went outside on the balcony and fell over the railing. On the way down, the 20-year-old hit a second-floor balcony before landing. He was taken to the hospital and survived the fall with 3 minor fractures to his spine, a dislocated elbow, a cracked wrist, and amnesia. Howell had no recollection of what had led to the fall, describing the experience as a fever dream and stating, "I was in the air, then I was in the hospital, looking over at my arm." Howell reported there were nearly 4 inches of bone sticking out of his elbow when he regained his senses. The teen underwent multiple surgeries and ultimately recovered. A week and several days later, on March the 15th, a teenage spring breaker fell in similar circumstances. Much like Howell, Ohio State University student Henry Meacock plummeted from a 3rd-floor balcony at the same hotel. At the time, Meacock was trying to help another hotel guest get a hold of her ID after she dropped it on the plexiglass between the balconies. The teenager went to retrieve it by jumping on the plexiglass, which broke on impact, resulting in him falling to his death. Number 14. Mariah Michelle Logan. After spending 3 days at the beach in Miami, Florida, to celebrate spring break and a friend's birthday, 23-year-old Mariah Michelle Logan and her friends were due to fly back home to Chicago. Early in the morning, on March the 17th of 2019, they were driving to the airport. While one of her friends was behind the wheel of their rented Hyundai Accent, Logan stuck her head out of the right rear window to say farewell to the city that had hosted them. While hanging out of the window, the 23-year-old shouted, "Bye, Miami!" moments before she was thrown from the car as it changed lanes. Logan landed on the roadway and was instantly hit by a Range Rover that was coming from behind. The driver stopped briefly to assess the situation, but then left the scene before he could be identified. First responders pronounced Logan dead, and the case was classified as a traffic homicide. The other 20-year-olds in the car from which Logan had fallen were identified as Trina Frazier, Aaliyah Frazier, and Kenyatta Birch. One of them told Logan's grieving boyfriend that she was smiling as she said her last words. Number 13. Liza Burke. In March of 2023, Liza Burke, a senior at the University of Georgia, traveled to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, with her boyfriend and a large group of friends. On March the 9th, Burke's activities consisted of going on a boat ride, cliff diving, and attending a bonfire. The next day, after finishing a workout at the gym, Burke complained to her boyfriend about a massive headache and told him she would take a nap. A few hours later, the young man went to check on her but was unable to wake her up. 21-year-old Burke was rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered that she suffered from a brain hemorrhage. Burke's family managed to get her airlifted to the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida, where she was diagnosed with a grade 4 astrocytoma glioma, an aggressive malignant tumor located on the brainstem. For several weeks, the young woman underwent daily radiation treatments, with doctors attempting to stop the tumor from growing. The medics were uncertain for how long the tumor had been present in the student's brain. Burke's mother recalled that she'd started complaining about headaches and lightheadedness since 2019. The woman had brushed it off as a sign of her daughter being sleep-deprived and stressed because of her studies. Doctors believed the tumor had remained dormant for years before suddenly becoming aggressive. After weeks of treatment, on April the 13th, a CT scan revealed Burke had suffered a new brain hemorrhage. The family had a meeting with her doctors a few days later. They decided to stop her treatments and arrange for Burke to spend her final days in a home in Florida by the sea with her loved ones. On April the 22nd, roughly 6 weeks since her spring break had ended abruptly, the 21-year-old passed away holding her brother's hand after they'd both fallen asleep on a sofa while watching a movie. Number 12. Denise Flume. During spring break, high school student Denise Flume joined a bonfire party. She returned home safely later that night, but had misplaced her purse. Flume decided it was best to search for it the following morning. On Good Friday 1986, Flume got into her Buick Regal and drove away, never to be seen again. She was expected to return soon after with her missing purse, so her parents grew concerned. Her car was discovered in a rural farm nearby, and an investigation was launched. No evidence of her whereabouts was found in the area. As there was no corpse to indicate Flume had been murdered, the police suspected she'd been kidnapped. In 2020, a suspect was arrested regarding this cold case. Sean McClung used to date Flume and was charged with voluntary manslaughter. He died only 3 months after confessing to murdering his ex-girlfriend. Number 11. Molly Ammon. Molly Ammon was a freshman at the University of Florida when she decided to head out with a few other college students to Madeira Beach for spring break. Her friends claimed she'd been drinking beer and liquor during a party. Ammon was so drunk that she had trouble walking, so her friends decided to take her to bed so that she could sleep it off. However, the following morning, she failed to wake up. When the others checked on her, they discovered she was unresponsive. Ammon's autopsy showed a blood alcohol concentration of over 0.40, which is 5 times the legal limit for impairment in the state. She was just 19 when she passed away due to alcohol poisoning. After her death, several public information campaigns were broadcast. It was meant to reassure spring breakers that they could call 911 without fear of disciplinary actions if they had a friend in need of help. Number 10. Wang. 24-year-old Michigan State University student Wang took a trip to Puerto Rico during spring break. He went hiking with a woman at a popular tourist attraction. When they stumbled upon a waterfall, Wang jumped into the water alone. He failed to resurface and witnesses called for help. Though first responders arrived soon after, there was nothing they could do to rescue Wang. His body was recovered and an investigation began to shed some light on the factors behind his death. The autopsy determined the student had drowned. He never attempted to swim back to shore, and it's been speculated that alcohol might have played a role in the incident. Number 9. Brittany Drexel. Brittany Drexel sneaked out of her house in 2009 when she was only 17 years old. She traveled for spring break to Myrtle Beach in South Carolina without telling her mother about it. While staying there, she decided to take a walk on her own and go visit a friend at another hotel. Drexel had texted her boyfriend to let him know where she was going. That was the last time anyone heard from her. The teenager's boyfriend called the friend she traveled with. No one knew where she was, and they grew increasingly concerned as time went on and she didn't contact anyone. In the end, they reported her missing. Though the police investigated her disappearance, no breakthrough was made until 2016. An inmate accused another man of abducting and murdering Drexel. In the aftermath of this occurrence, the authorities considered the cold case a homicide, though no arrests have been made up to 2020. Number 8. Mark Fike. A strange murder took place during spring break 1996 at Daytona Beach. At the time, Mark Fike was just 18 years old. He'd called his mother from a local payphone to let her know how things were going. That was when 17-year-old John Rainey approached him from behind. The teenager pulled out a gun and threatened his victim. Rainey had just escaped from juvenile detention and demanded Fike give him his wallet. His mother heard a commotion in the background, and Fike hung up after telling her he had to go. He refused to hand over his money, which caused an enraged Rainey to shoot him in the head. Fike's best friend rushed to his side and tried to stop the bleeding, but there was nothing that could be done. By the time the police arrived, Fike was already dead. John Rainey was apprehended soon after, along with 2 accomplices. As of 2020, he's still serving a life sentence in prison. Number 7. Jordan Britton. While on a spring break trip to South Padre Island in Texas, Jordan Britton suffered a fatal accident. He had separated from the friends he was vacationing with, and witnesses reported seeing him wandering around looking disoriented. His corpse was discovered partially submerged in the wetlands close to the resort he'd been staying at. The autopsy revealed he had died from a combination of immersion hypothermia and drowning. The doctors also mentioned Britton suffered from acute drug intoxication at the time of his death. Investigators searched the victim's car for further clues that might have explained the incident, and they found designer ecstasy pills. Number 6. Ahmed Ali. Ahmed Ali went on a spring break trip to Cancun as a way of taking some time off from his studying. According to witnesses, after a night of drinking and doing drugs, he got into a heated argument with his girlfriend. Guests at the hotel told the police they saw him pacing down the hallway while his girlfriend tried to get him to sit down and rest. Later that night, he suffered an accident when he fell down one of the hotel's balconies. He didn't survive the fall. Though the exact reason he plummeted to his death remains under investigation, his intoxication might have influenced the night's terrible outcome. Number 5. Meg Moa. 21-year-old Meg Moa was traveling down a Mississippi highway when she parked at a rest stop. The New Orleans student was on spring break, and she was meant to be graduating less than 3 months later. Accompanied by her friends, Moa walked down the parking lot when a tractor-trailer drove by. In a freak occurrence, the vehicle lost a set of dual tires, weighing up to 500 pounds. They struck Moa straight on, killing her instantly. The police investigated the accident, but it was determined the tractor-trailer's driver wasn't suspected of any wrongdoing. He stopped immediately after the tires rolled off. Moa's mother told the media she wanted to have someone to blame, but she understood it had been an unusual accident and no one had acted recklessly. Number 4. Tyler Douglas Gilmore. Tyler Douglas Gilmore was partying with a group of friends at Panama City Beach during spring break. He'd been drinking heavily and was intoxicated when he was last seen. Late that night, he wandered off, but his friends were too distracted to notice him missing. The 20-year-old ended up in a parking garage, though what had led him there remained a mystery. He suffered a fall and died as a result of his injuries. It would take several hours before a passerby noticed him lying on the ground. When the police arrived, Gilmore had been dead for at least 120 minutes. Authorities didn't report what height the student had fallen from. His death was considered an accident and no foul play was suspected. Number 3. Andrew Doogi. College football player Andrew Doogi traveled to Mexico City with his Amherst College friends during spring break in 2018. On March the 15th, his body was discovered at a train station. A police officer was called to the scene to investigate the report of a person wandering into an unauthorized area. Once there, he noticed the body spread on the tracks. He contacted workers in order to have the power cut off and called an ambulance that arrived soon after. Doogi was already dead and it was determined he'd been electrocuted. Suicide was ruled out and the possibility of foul play was investigated. No further information has been released about the case up to the recording of this video. Today's topic was requested by Ivor Reskessner 2019 and Ollie KitKat. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Braden Coverdale. 21-year-old Texas student Braden Coverdale was spending spring break in Orange Beach, Alabama, along with his college friends. Though little has been disclosed about the incident, Coverdale was drinking heavily during a party when he collapsed at the beach. First responders arrived at the scene and discovered the young man was unresponsive. He was rushed to the ER. Unfortunately, there was nothing doctors could do to save Coverdale's life. He was declared dead upon arriving at the hospital. It was speculated he'd passed away due to alcohol poisoning. Coverdale's family has since started a scholarship in his name. If you have not yet seen our video about when boat outings go wrong, then stick around after number 1 to watch that one as well. Number 1. Mark Kilroy. Mark Kilroy became a victim of the infamous Palo Mayombe cult, led by serial killer Adolfo Constanzo, while on spring break in Matamoros, Mexico. While out partying, he got separated from his friends. They looked for him for hours and ended up assuming he'd hooked up with someone and would return in the morning. When they woke up though, there was still no sign of Kilroy. The young American student had been kidnapped by 2 men posing as policemen, Serafin Hernandez and Malio Ponce Torres. Both were members of Constanzo's narco cult and were searching for a victim to sacrifice. All through that night, Kilroy was tortured until the cult leader decided to kill him by cutting off Kilroy's head. Part of his body, including his brain and spine, were added to a cauldron known as Nganga. This ritual was supposed to grant magical powers, such as protection from police interference, to the participants of the human sacrifice. Eventually, cult members were apprehended due to an unrelated case. Believing themselves to be protected by the Nganga's dark powers, they confessed to the murder of Kilroy. They reportedly thought that they'd miraculously suffer no repercussions. Alongside his corpse, 15 other mutilated bodies were exhumed. 14 members of the cult were charged with a myriad of crimes, including murder and drug trafficking. Constanzo fled to Mexico City with a handful of his followers. Following a standoff with the police, Constanzo commanded one of his followers to shoot him and his male lover. They both died, and thus the cult leader never answered for his horrendous crimes. Number 8. Christa Lee Foster. North Carolina woman Christa Lee Foster, aged 22, was on a pontoon boat with friends on South Carolina's Lake Watertree in July of 2019. The young woman had reportedly graduated at the top of her class at Piedmont High School and had recently started a non-profit organization called Painting with a Purpose, which raised money in support of her local charities. Multiple reports indicated that she was well liked by those who knew her. At some point during the outing, Philemon, who wasn't wearing a personal flotation device, jumped from the boat along with several others. She failed to re-emerge from the murky reservoir in the moments that followed, and her group called 911. The young woman's body was found 2 days later near Jutty Point, and it was determined that she'd drowned. No foul play was suspected. Camden Fire Chief John Bowers told a media outlet that there were many unanswered questions about the circumstances surrounding Philemon's death, but no further updates were released following the incident. Number 7. Franklin Freddy Meave Vasquez. On March the 9th of 2022, undocumented Mexican immigrant Franklin Freddy Meave Vasquez admitted he'd killed a man aboard a scallop boat off the coast of Massachusetts. In September of 2018, Vasquez, who was then in his late 20s, was aboard the Captain Billy Harper vessel, along with 6 other crew members. As reported in a Mayday call to the Coast Guard, Vasquez went crazy and started attacking them as they were sailing off Nantucket. None of the victims were identified. According to the Department of Justice, Vasquez first went to the shucking house and hit a crew member in the head with a hammer, knocking him unconscious. He then stabbed the second man multiple times with a long fillet knife on the boat deck. A third crew member was struck in the head with a hammer while he was climbing up from the ice hold and subsequently fell off the ladder. While the captain and remaining crew tried to detain Vasquez, he was able to escape and climb to the top of the rigging mast, where he remained until he was taken into custody by the Coast Guard. The crew member he'd stabbed was pronounced dead by the boat's doctor. 4 years later, Vasquez pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of assault with a dangerous weapon. Number 6. Laura Perry. 38-year-old London woman Laura Perry was on a Norfolk Broads hired boat on the River Bure on August 19th of 2020. They were part of a group of 9 which included Perry's husband, who was also the nominated skipper, and their 3 sons. Joining them were also Perry's mother, father, and sister, with the latter operating the 42-foot motor cruiser Diamond Emblem 1. At around 1:18 p.m., the boat's stern made hard contact with the river wall opposite Great Yarmouth Yacht Station. The jolt caused Perry to fall overboard from the rear deck. The mother of 3 became entangled in a rope and was also caught in the propeller, suffering injuries that resulted in her drowning. In the tragedy's aftermath, an inquiry found that the accident might have been avoided had the Emblem 1 been fitted with a guardrail around its stern. Further recommendations were made by the report to increase the oversight of hire boat handover protocols, particularly regarding large motor cruisers and inexperienced tourists. Number 5. Wilmington River Collision. 5 people perished over Memorial Day weekend 2022 following a frontal collision between 2 boats on the Wilmington River in Chatham County, Georgia. The vessels had been traveling in opposite directions when they smashed into each other near the Oatland Island Wildlife Center docks at around 10:30 a.m. The spot, where the river is met by Richardson Creek, is known as a dangerous area. A bystander alerted the Coast Guard, who launched a helicopter search and airlifted 1 survivor from the water. 9 people were involved in the crash, 2 of whom were pronounced dead at the scene and 3 others who were pulled from the water in the days that followed. 4 of them were members of the same Savannah family. They were named as Chris Leffler and his wife Lori, both in their early 50s, along with their 2 sons, Nate and Zach. The Leffler's daughter and her friend were among the survivors. According to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Savannah resident Mark Christopher Stegel, aged 45, was charged with boating under the influence in connection with the accident. Number 4. Hector Ricardo Brun and Casey Elizabeth Banks. 2 boaters died in an accident at Canyon Lake in Comal County, Texas, on June the 10th of 2022, after they were struck by a propeller. San Antonio residents Hector Ricardo Brun and Casey Elizabeth Banks, aged 54 and 22 respectively, were on a twin-engine boat along with several others. They were about 100 yards from shore and in water that was 25 to 30 feet deep. Following a preliminary investigation, an official from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department reported that one of the boat's occupants accidentally throttled or shifted it. In the moments that followed, one or both of its propellers fatally struck Brun and Banks. The tragedy followed two recent drowning incidents on June the 5th and 6th, involving two men both in their 50s. One had tried to swim 40 yards back to a boat ramp, while the other was found face down in the water while wearing a life jacket close to another boat ramp. Number 3. Linda Carman. In May of 2022, nearly 6 years after he'd been found floating on a raft on the coast of New England, 28-year-old Nathan Carman was charged with killing his mother. In September of 2016, Nathan had arranged to go on a fishing trip with his mother, Linda, in his 31-foot boat called Chicken Pox. The vessel sank and Linda died at sea, while Nathan was found floating on an inflatable raft roughly 8 days after they'd set out. He claimed that the vessel had started to rapidly take in water, prompting him to make his way to the raft. Nathan maintained that he'd called out to his mother but never saw her again. In 2019, a federal judge in Rhode Island concluded that the young man had contributed to the boat sinking. As reported by witnesses, he'd removed 2 stabilizing trim tabs from the stern near the vessel's waterline, leaving holes that he tried to seal with an epoxy stick. The authorities also suspected that Nathan had been responsible for the murder of his grandfather, John Chakalos, on December the 20th of 2013. Nathan had had dinner with the 87-year-old the night before he was shot 3 times in the head at his home in Windsor, Connecticut. Earlier in November, Nathan had used his New Hampshire driver's license to purchase a rifle. He was accused of Chakalos' murder in the 2022 indictment, but not charged with it. Investigators suspected that he'd killed both his grandfather and mother in a bid to gain control of the former's multi-million-dollar fortune. Nathan's trial was ongoing as of the latest information available on the matter. Number 2. 2018 Labor Day weekend crash. Over Labor Day weekend in 2018, a horrific crash on the Colorado River in California resulted in 4 fatalities and multiple people sustaining serious injuries. It occurred just after 8 p.m. on September the 1st on a stretch of the river between Pirates Cove and the Topok Marina. A southbound 26-foot sleek collided head-on with a northbound 28-foot hallet boat, which had 9 passengers aboard. The latter was operated by 49-year-old Brian Grabowski, and its occupants included Christine Lewis, as well as Kyra Drury and Reagan Heitzig, both in their mid-20s. Operating the sleek was Victorville man Jeremy Christ, and his vehicle carried 5 passengers. No charges were filed in the aftermath, as the crash was determined to have occurred due to a combination of factors that included both Grabowski and Christ had been operating the vehicles at unsafe speeds during the time of day with poor visibility and on a narrow stretch of the river. As a result of the devastating impact, all of the people on both boats ended up in the water and the vessels began sinking. Chaos followed as none of them were wearing life vests and started drifting with the current. Some were dealing with crippling injuries or trying to make their way through the dark and fast-moving debris-filled water. Heitzig's sister Jordan suffered a fractured spine at the top of her neck and was knocked unconscious. Her life was saved by her aunt, who was reported as Grabowski's wife, and both women survived after being taken to a Las Vegas hospital. Taylor Corbino, a survivor from the sleek, later recounted, "The current was so strong it was moving me around." All of the fatalities were from the hallet, and in the days that followed, rescue crews recovered the bodies of 51-year-old Lewis, along with Drury and Grabowski. Heitzig was missing and presumed dead for nearly 2 years, until July the 4th of 2020, when a body was found near Blankenship Bend and confirmed as hers via dental records. Number 1. Table Rock Duckboat accident. On July the 19th of 2018, a Duckboat operated by the Ride the Ducks tour headed out on Table Rock Lake near Branson, Missouri, while carrying 31 people. Duckboats were wheeled amphibious vehicles used by the U.S. military towards the end of World War II and in the Korean War. In the late 1940s, a Minnesota veteran converted some of the vessels into attractions and started offering tours. The practice was picked up by multiple businesses in the decades that followed. On July the 18th, the National Weather Service had issued severe thunderstorm warnings. Winds in excess of 60 miles per hour hit the Branson area and generated 3-foot waves on the lake. The Ride the Ducks amphibious vehicle, built in 1944, had been modified to hold more people, but its stability didn't hold up when it was struck by the storm. A 911 call was sent out at around 7:09 p.m., by which point the boat had capsized and started sinking. None of its occupants were wearing life jackets, and 17 people lost their lives, 9 of whom were members of the same family visiting from Indianapolis. A number of issues had led to the crash and consequent fatalities, including the crew's failure to heed storm warnings and the boat's build, particularly its overhead canopy, which had hastened the sinking process, trapping passengers inside. The design liability had been highlighted by the National Transportation Safety Board on multiple occasions, but had gone unaddressed. Captain Kenneth Scott McKee was charged with 17 counts of misconduct, negligence, or inattention to duty by a ship's officer, resulting in death. Also indicted for multiple felonies was Ride the Ducks Branson's general manager, along with an operations manager. The state charges against the 3 workers were ultimately dismissed in April of 2022, while all the lawsuits initiated by the accident survivors and victims' families were settled by the Ride the Ducks parent company. The Branson branch was permanently closed in the tragedy's wake. Thanks for watching. If you could permanently get rid of one season, which would it be and why? Let us know in the comments section below.